Teachers ask her about it. The girl simply replies she doesn't know how it happened. At the end of 2011, Erica's mother finally takes action. She, too, has noticed the child's changes during the few, and if only supervised, brief meetings with her daughter. She writes an official complaint to those responsible at the Youth Welfare Office. In it, she expresses her concern that her ex-husband may be abusing Erica. Furthermore, she asks that she be given custody of her daughter again, since she has her life under control again and can take care of the first grader appropriately. This request is not granted, although the mother does not shy away from seeking court assistance. Tarki wants to keep the custody and is also against the meetings of mother and child, which he has tried to prevent so far. He claims that the meetings are extremely stressful for the child and that it takes days for the child to calm down and rejoin the family. The court refrains from questioning Erica personally and follows the father's version. The child is to continue living under his care, and visits to her mother must be avoided in the future to ensure the child's well-being. A short time later, however, new developments occur. In November, Tarki asserts to the Youth Welfare Office that Erica has developed numerous behavioral disorders. He asks for support and gets it from the Youth Welfare Office. His daughter is temporarily placed in a foster home, and almost immediately a miraculous change occurs. Suddenly, she seems like a changed child, like a completely different child. She is cheerful, laughs a lot, is outgoing, a little whirlwind, and all the educators and also the other children immediately take Erica into their hearts. Remarkably, during all these weeks in the home, no new injuries appear. Moreover, the old ones heal and are no longer visible. It feels a bit as if the old Erica were standing in front of you again. During these few months, the girl sees her father and his partner only on the weekends. Everything seems perfectly fine and harmonious. But when the time in the home finally comes to an end and Erica is supposed to go back to her father completely, the situation escalates. The child refuses to move back to her father. No, she doesn't want to. She would rather stay in the home. Yet none of the people in charge at the facility attaches any importance to the whole thing. Since the time period granted for her to stay at the home has expired and the authorities have decreed accordingly, Erica, despite her categorical refusal, has to move back to her father's one-room apartment in Puotila. Tarki has not kept his promises to the Youth Welfare Office to find a larger place to live. Within a very short time, little Erica starts to feel worse again. Her mysterious injuries reappear, and her appearance quickly resembles what it looked like before she went to the home, neglected and unkempt. At school, too, Erica's behavior becomes increasingly conspicuous. She destroys at least 3 of her school satchels. Most recently, Erica comes to school with a plastic bag because Touko and Nadia don't want to buy her a new satchel. Repeatedly, the girl tears her school books into tiny shreds or loses them. In addition, she arrives late or complains that she feels sick. In addition, injuries can be seen on her body several times, but when teachers ask Erica about them, the only evasive answer is, "I don't know." The walls of the small apartment in Puotila are so thin that the neighbors hear more of what is going on in there than they would like. They keep hearing the girl screaming and crying, the foul insults Nadia keeps using to humiliate the little girl. Erica is a cow, a whore, or a fat ass. She would be much too fat to ever make friends. And once, probably during one of the forced feedings, Nadia Biro even yells, "If you don't eat, you'll regret it." In the spring of 2012, the violence against Erica reaches a new, even more horrific level. By now, neighbors are getting word that the father is also repeatedly yelling at the 8-year-old. It's just the tip of the iceberg, because since mid-April, Nadia has come up with a new consequence for the girl. From now on, because the child is so restless in the evenings and at night, she has to sleep with her hands tied and wrapped in foil. This way, she would no longer disturb Touko and Nadia during their evening relaxation. Nadia dismisses Touko's initial concerns by claiming that this measure is common practice in clinics. She has experienced this several times as a doctor. Erika's father trusts the woman at his side, perhaps out of convenience, perhaps out of fear. Later he will testify that he was also afraid of Nadia in several situations and therefore let her go. Thus, from now on, the 8-year-old girl's hands are tied in the evenings, and then she is wrapped in foil to form a motionless package. Even the smallest movements are completely impossible, not to mention getting up to go to the toilet. How must she have fared during the nights in the confinement, in the heat that arose in the plastic wrapping? 4 weeks later, on May 12, 2012, things take their terrible course. On this Saturday, Erika is scheduled to visit her grandparents together with her father. But Touko comes alone. His parents may be surprised, but so far, Touko has always been able to pull excuses out of his hat that sounded quite plausible in all situations, both to social workers and to his parents. Meanwhile, the girl was alone at home with Nadia. What happened there that afternoon can no longer be reconstructed. The only fact is that Erika's hands were already tied for the night when her father returned from the visit. That day, Nadia had already tied the child's hands and feet together with tape, as she usually did. But today, this does not seem to be enough for her. On top of that, she gets cable ties and additionally ties Erika with them. Around each wrist and each ankle comes a cable tie. These are in turn fixed together by 2 more cable ties. In total, there are 8 pieces. Then the girl is wrapped tightly in a sheet. A plastic sheet is placed around it as an additional layer. This is how the child is placed on the sofa to sleep. That evening, Nadia and Touko want to watch a movie on TV in peace, but they keep feeling disturbed by the girl on the sofa, especially when Erika bumps her head against their bed frame. It is the moment when the situation gets completely out of control. To make the child finally shut up, Nadia hits Erika several times in the stomach with her fist. She also hits the soles of her feet with a cable and orders the girl to finally lie still. Finally, tape is put over Erika's mouth and nose to stop her from making a sound. In addition, Nadia and Touko pull both the sheet and the plastic tarp over the child's face up to her hair. Perhaps to emphasize their demands for quiet, the stepmother then once again presses her knee into the child's belly while the father sits on the child's legs. Eventually, they finally let up and continue watching TV before Nadia and Touko also go to sleep. It becomes a decidedly quiet night for them. The day after, it is May 13 and Mother's Day. Nadia wakes up around 4 in the morning because her bladder is pressing. When the woman returns from the toilet, she briefly jiggles Erika. But the girl does not stir. Now Nadia pulls down the tarp in the sheet and looks into a completely blue child's face. Little Erika is dead, suffocated, after a death struggle that lasted for at least 4 to 6 hours. During the investigation, Nadia Biro and Touko Tarki repeatedly affirmed to the police officers that they did not mean to kill the child. The death, they say, was a terrible accident. The father also states that he had no idea at all that the temperature in the tarp would rise so much. Similarly, Nadia, the woman who claims to be a doctor, states that she truly believed Erika could get enough air through the exposed scalp. During the autopsy of the little girl's body, a total of 89 signs of abuse are found on the 8-year-old's body. When the case becomes public after the arrest of the 2 suspects, it is a shock that shakes the whole of Finland permanently. Immediately questions arise. How could this have happened in the first place? Why didn't the authorities act? Because it quickly becomes clear that there were more than enough tips to the Youth Welfare Office that were not acted upon. In addition to the mother, numerous neighbors in Puotila, as well as the director of the elementary school, have contacted the responsible authorities several times. However, a thorough investigation of the allegations and signs of child abuse failed to materialize. It also becomes clear that important contact points and authorities have not been sufficiently networked in Finland so far, and that crucial information has simply not been passed on. The pediatrician in charge, for example, was surprised by the bruise on Erica's face during a visit, but since she had no idea about the running, the cramped quarters with her father, or the other clues, further steps were unfortunately not taken. Could Erica's life have been saved? In light of the fact that in 2012, each social worker in Finland was responsible for about 160 cases, this is indeed questionable. Recommended in a study a year later were 20 to 50 cases. However, the fatal inaction in this case is only a reflection of a frightening situation in Finland at that time. Between 2003 and 2012, about 10 infants and children died each year as a result of domestic violence. About 300 were seriously injured during this period. These are the known cases. The number of unreported cases is higher. The trial in the Erika Helintarki case begins on August 30, 2012 in Helsinki. The two defendants, Nadia Biro and Tuoki Tarki, are accused of abuse, deprivation of liberty, and murder. Nadia is additionally accused of assuming a false identity. The alleged doctor and neurosurgeon, a stocky woman with short, dark hair and a serious expression on her face, makes an almost maternal impression on many at first. Perhaps this is one of the reasons why, at the beginning of Erika's ordeal, the mother, social workers, and teachers assumed that the problems that arose were related to Tuoki Tarki. However, it is becoming increasingly clear to attentive observers that Nadia is in fact playing a significant role in the incidents. A social worker who visits the apartment several times apparently has doubts early on with regard to the woman's real identity. This also applies to the stories she tells about her background. The man even asks Tuoki several times to send him information about Nadia's alleged 4 pregnancies, medical records, birth certificates or registration certifications of the children, school reports, or something like that. However, despite being told that this would be delivered to his hand, the man does not receive any documents or proof of identity from Nadia. For this reason, the social worker even finally notes that Nadia, in his opinion, is not suitable as a caregiver for Erika. The man considers the alleged doctor of French-Moroccan origin to be simply a liar. However, it does not occur to him that she also represents a concrete danger for Erika. Tuoki's family, on the other hand, takes a closer look. A sister-in-law working in the healthcare system inquired about Nadia in the healthcare facilities in Helsinki. The result of these inquiries is interesting and surprises those involved. The woman, who claims to be a doctor with foreign roots, is in fact a native Finn and had previously worked in a nursing home in Helsinki. However, she was kicked out of there for stealing from a patient. Nadia's real name is Sirpa Laamanen. As the proceedings continue, it becomes increasingly clear that Sirpa Laamanen is a highly problematic person. She left her first family because she suffered from severe mental health problems. She had not been taking her prescribed medication since 2007. Tuoki Tarki claims that this is as unknown to him as Nadia's real name. His partner lied to him about her identity. During his explanations, Erika's father also points out that he had always been afraid of Nadia or Sirpa. The abuse of Erika had actually come from her. The two defendants admit to having caused the death of the 8-year-old girl, but they plead not guilty to murder. Due to the accusations and incidents in the room, the court orders a psychiatric examination of the two defendants to clarify their culpability. The result is unequivocal. Both are fully culpable. The psychiatric experts are certain both are completely capable of control and insight without any restrictions. Father and stepmother are capable of assessing the consequences of their actions. The available evidence and the testimonies that draw the story of the little girl bring tears to the eyes of the judges and those present. They reveal a kaleidoscope of atrocities that have been repeatedly pointed out by a wide variety of people, without the authorities intervening. The videos of force-feeding are also made the subject of evidence. They are documentations that exceed the limit of tolerability for some of those present in the hall. At the trial, Neighbors from Puotila confirm that 90% of Erica's audible verbal attacks and abuse came from Sirpa, but the father was definitely involved as well. In this context, the prosecutor tells Tarki that he can no longer hide behind his partner. Another frightening moment in this criminal case is a key statement made by Sirpa. Although she herself overhears all the bad things and actions once again, she shows no remorse until the very end. One also searches in vain for compassion. Instead, she tells the court that she did nothing wrong. Everything that happened was done in agreement with Erica's father. Yes, she had never even had anything against the child. It had only simply had to learn rules. The mother had failed here. On March 19, 2013, the verdict in the case of Erika Helene Tarki is issued. Her father, Touko Tarki, and Sirpa Laamanen are both imprisoned for life. The defense lawyers immediately appeal against the verdict, but the competent court of appeal upholds the first instance decision. With regard to the role played by the father in the course of the abuse and killing, it is pointed out in the grounds that the father was obviously indifferent to the cruel treatment of his daughter. This is evidenced by the long period of time over which the incidents took place. The appeal filed against the Court of Appeal's decision by the two perpetrators to the Supreme Court of Finland is dismissed directly without a hearing. In the aftermath of this case, there was a public debate in Finland on how to improve child protection. In the course of this, several investigations were carried out, studies were made, and working groups were also set up, for example, in the Ministry of Health and Social Affairs. The latter suggested investing more financial resources in child protection. Furthermore, better sharing of relevant data should be ensured. So far, success seems to have been limited. According to police statistics, 5 to 6 children are still murdered in Finland every year. While clearing out the apartment in Puotila, Touko Tarki's relatives make a surprising discovery that sheds yet another light on the personality of the alleged Nadia. While clearing out the apartment, they discover at the very top of a shelf and in cupboards some keys and various items, things that Erika is supposed to have stolen, hidden, or lost. Sirpa Laamanen had used these items to justify her cruel punitive actions against the girl. However, the objects were so high up, so much out of reach of an 8-year-old child, that this allows only one conclusion: Sirpa hid them herself as a pretext. None of this brings little Erika back, who is buried in Vantaa, north of Helsinki. Her gravesite bears the number 10-3-50, and in front of the eternal light that someone has placed in front of the tombstone, a princess tiara with lots of glitter and little feathers has been placed, just as Erika particularly liked it. In his remarks, the prosecutor had pointed out an important detail of the last hours of the little girl's life. When Erika was found dead, she still had the little princess tiara on her head, which she had been given by her mother on her last birthday a month earlier. By wrapping her head with the sheet and tarp, the small teeth of the hairband dug deep into the skin of her forehead. 4 of the colorful glitter stones fell out. They are gone forever, like Erika. The prosecutor is sure Erika was able to survive the horrors of the night she was tied up and wrapped up because of that, because she sent her thoughts to the dream world. There, where she was a princess. There, where the dreams of a little girl could still come true. Chapter 11. Thou Shalt Not Kill. Simon's brain needs a few seconds until it understands what is going on here. His body, however, reacts directly. His pupils narrow, his eyes fill with tears. His stomach contracts painfully, and his heart seems to be beating so hard that it threatens to burst his little chest. He can't fall asleep because tomorrow is the math test he's so afraid of. But suddenly it's no longer the upcoming exam that keeps him awake. It screams. Whimpering, desperate, sobbing words. "Stop it," and "Please," surge from the living room. As he curiously pokes his little head past the doorframe to get outside, a horrific scenario plays out before his eyes. His mom is lying on the floor. She is bleeding and crying. She shieldingly holds her arms in front of her face. Then a foot hits her. Her protective shield cannot withstand the kick. Her face is exposed. Simon's gaze wanders to the attacker. It is Dad. He pounds his fist relentlessly on the face that always smiles so lovingly at him. When he hears a creaking sound, as if something is breaking, Simon runs to his dad. He cries and begs him to stop, but he keeps going on and orders his son back to his bed and closes the door. Instinctively, Simon feels that he shouldn't contradict Dad. Marko Tuominen sits at his desk and looks at his wristwatch. It's just after midnight. The Helsinki police station is still busy despite the late hour. He is not the only restless investigator whose cases give him no peace. It's easier to concentrate at night because no other colleagues or calls interrupt him. Only the familiar rustling of documents can be heard, the turning of pages in a folder, and the scratching of ballpoint pens busily leaving notes in the files. But slowly, Tuominen feels his fatigue taking over. He strokes his light hair and looks out the window right next to his seat. His face is only dimly reflected in the darkness. Nevertheless, the deep, dark circles under his eyes cannot be overlooked. Marko averts his gaze and tidies up some papers. Just as he takes the last sip of coffee from his cup, the phone rings. He almost swallows as the ringing breaks the nightly silence. He picks it up and speaks to a friendly colleague from dispatch who transfers a call to him. A young man who wants to report a murder. Nothing unusual in the turbulent metropolis of Helsinki. But when Marko hangs up, he realizes that he won't be going home tonight. The caller's name is Simon Juni, and he is 20 years old. 10 years ago, his father murdered his mother in their apartment. As a 10-year-old boy at the time, he had to witness everything. He still remembers the lukewarm night in August 1980 very clearly. Because a math test was due at school the next day, he lay awake in his bed. Then suddenly, he heard the screams. His voice choked with tears as he described the details of the evening. The next morning, Simon saw his mother lying on the floor in the bathroom while he was brushing his teeth. After he returned home from school, his mother was gone. His father told him she was dead. From the files from that time, Marko can see that such a case had indeed occurred in August 1980. The emergency services were called to an apartment building in Kantula, East Helsinki. Ismo Juni, then 37 years old, met the police officers at his apartment, where they found the naked body of his 36-year-old wife rolled up in a carpet. Ismo told them that his wife had drunk a lot the night before and then had taken a bath. While getting out of the bathtub, he said, she had an unfortunate fall and hit her head on the concrete of the tub. In the process, she had also lost one of her incisors. She died immediately. In the autopsy, the coroners confirmed the widower's story. The injuries on the body's head could have been caused by the aforementioned fall, and the woman did indeed have some alcohol in her blood when she died. Since there were also no signs of a violent altercation in the apartment, the case was categorized as an accident and archived. Marko reflects. Hours have already passed since the call. Since then, he has been going through the files from that time. He tries to pay attention to every detail. Actually, the case is a closed matter and leaves no doubts. But the young man on the phone has described his version of the story so vividly that Marko is now very much in doubt. Simon Juni knows too many details for a hoax call intended to mislead the police. It is also easy to verify his identity. The reason he gives for not coming forward until now, 10 years later, out of fear of his own father, is also extremely understandable. It must have been an indescribable trauma for the boy to see his own mother die and then to be dependent on the murderer for 10 years as a child. Marko makes a decision. Tomorrow he will resume the investigation of the Juni case. After some sleep, the experienced investigator assembles a small team of colleagues the next day and presents the case to them. After everyone is up to date, the investigators start checking the identity of Simon Juni. In fact, he is the son of Ismo Juni. When Marco looks him in the ice-blue eyes, he is sure that the young man is telling the truth. The interviews with relatives and neighbors reveal that Ismo visited her grave every day after his wife's death. No one doubts that the widower is grieving for his deceased wife, nor has he met a new woman since then. However, a neighbor reported that she had noticed a change in Ismo's behavior. He constantly talked about death and dead people. The widower seemed to be fascinated by these topics. According to his neighbor, he even tried to get a job in a morgue because he wanted to steal the gold teeth from the corpses. Ismo did not get the job. This statement makes Marco wonder because his wife's corpse was also missing a tooth when it was brought to the coroner's office, a rather striking coincidence. But Marco does not believe in coincidences. When Ismo sits across from him in the interrogation room, Marco doesn't notice anything peculiar. A man of medium height, medium stature, medium fine hair in a shade between blonde and brunette. Marco describes to him the suspicions against him. Ismo patiently lets him finish and does not interrupt him once. Then, to Marco's astonishment, he admits to the murder of his wife 10 years ago. They had an argument, that's when it happened. He pulled out her incisor with pliers to see if she was dead or alive. After she showed no reaction, he knew she was dead. Ismo answers the question of what he did with her tooth by reaching into his jeans pocket. He pulls out his wallet and opens the small inner compartment, which can be closed with a tiny zipper. Marco feels nauseous as Ismo pulls out a yellowed incisor and places it on the table between them. While Ismo is in custody, Marco goes through all the documents in the 1980 file again. The prompt confession strikes him as questionable. Usually murderers deny their deeds outright. He doesn't have many clues, but the black and white photos from that time support Ismo's story. The tooth he has kept in his wallet for 10 years is also strong evidence of his guilt. The local media in Helsinki are abuzz with headlines about the new twists in the case. They call him the tooth killer. Marco can't do anything with these sensationalist phrases, but the population jumps at it. Even the neighbor, who had told him about Ismo's desire to work in a morgue, contacts the inspector once again. Her husband, Matti, had died 4 years ago. He and Ismo were close friends. The case was closed as an accident. A fire in the cozy forest cabin in Hertaniemi, a suburb of Helsinki, caused by the heating stove. The rescue forces could do nothing more for Matti and the family dog. Both were found dead at the scene. As Marco reads through the 1986 file, he falters at one point. Matti's body was missing both incisors. Again, Ismo calmly sits in front of him. Again, the inspector describes to him the suspicion of the crime. And again, Ismo immediately confesses that he killed his friend at the time, Matti, 4 years ago, in his forest cabin. They had been drinking, and Ismo could no longer stand Matti. He said his wife was beautiful, and their marriage was enviable. Matti never tired of raving about it all, knowing that Ismo's wife had died only a few years before. Overcome by envy, he could no longer restrain himself. He hit Matti on the head with a glass vase from the windowsill. When he lay unconscious on the floor, he pulled out both of his incisors with a pair of pliers. He also picked them up in his wallet since then. He then set the shack on fire from the inside and outside with lamp oil and watched the fire from a safe distance. When Marco returns to his desk, it is late. He remembers well the fire at Matti's cabin in 1986 because it was at that time that he had been promoted. Back then, in the early 1980s, there had been a conspicuous number of fires in Hertaniemi. It is clear to the investigator what he has to do. During a sleepless night, he searches through all the files on the fires of that time. When the morning light falls softly through his window and the first colleagues from the early shift arrive, he makes a discovery. In 2 other cases, there are bodies that were also missing their incisors. 2 months before Matti's murder, Ismo meets Seppo and Juha on the beach at Herttaniemi. The two men are about his age and are sitting in the sand drinking beer and laughing. Ismo quickly strikes up a conversation with the two. They talk about the fires, there must be a fire starter going around, about women and sports. When it gets dark, Seppo and Juha invite Ismo to come to their cabin in the forest. A few bottles of beer are kept cold there, and they can also find a bottle or two of vodka in one of the cupboards. Once inside the hut, they sit on wooden benches around the table. Ismo is burning with anger. The two have an enviable friendship. They constantly make little jokes that only the two of them understand. Every other sentence begins with, "Remember when we—" Ismo, on the other hand, has no one to call for a beer on the beach. No one with shared memories and his own familiar jokes. In the blink of an eye, he loses all desire for alcohol. Seppo and Juha, on the other hand, lie on the benches after another hour, drunk off their asses. Ismo grabs one of the candles that gave them light that evening. There is no electric light in the hut. He throws the burning candle on the floor between the two sleeping men. Then he takes a tea towel and puts it on the hot stove. When it catches fire after a few minutes, Ismo leaves the hut. He stokes the fire with gasoline and thus sets the whole hut on fire. He drops the small canister on the ground while still on the scene. The investigators of the time also classified this incident as an accident. After all, remains of the burnt tea towel were found on the stove. No one noticed the canister with the flammable liquid. Again, Ismo confesses immediately, and again he tells the truth. Every detail matches the photos and descriptions in the file at the time. The canister can be seen on one of the photos exactly in the place Ismo recounts. But even after this story, Ismo is not finished with his confession. 2 years after the fire, in 1988, Ismo meets Polly in Herttaniemi's small liquor store. The elderly man permanently lives in his hut in the forest as a hermit. Ismo accidentally steps on his foot in the cramped store and apologizes post-haste. The hermit responds kindly, and the two quickly strike up a conversation. Polly finally invites Ismo to his hut for a glass of wine. There, the two spend a few hours together, talking animatedly. As Ismo gesticulates wildly while talking, he hits a porcelain figurine with one hand, which falls to the ground and breaks. Polly doesn't own much, but what he does own has meaning and special value to him. So does this inherited porcelain figurine. Polly gets angry and asks Ismo to leave. The latter leaves the hut, but turns back halfway. Nobody is going to talk to him in such a disrespectful way. He waits. When he sees Polly sleeping through the window a little later, he takes revenge. Using lamp oil, he first sets fire to the outside of the hut, and then to the swing set that stands a little further away at the front of the property. A photo in the investigation file and a corresponding note prove that the grass between the hut and the swing did not show the slightest burn marks, which suggests that the perpetrator set fire to the hut and the swing, one after the other. Again, Ismo tells the truth. In 1992, the trial of Ismo takes place in Helsinki. To everyone's surprise, he retracts all his confessions right at the beginning of the hearing. He affirms that at the time of the fires, he was undergoing treatment in a closed facility. Ismo's testimony is nothing more than an unnecessary postponement of the conviction for the investigators. It is quickly discovered that Ismo was indeed in a medical facility for treatment at the time, but it was not locked. He may very well have been able to sneak out unnoticed in the late evening hours until the early morning. The defendant finally buckles and confesses to having done just that. Ismo's psychiatric report paints a talkative, open man who easily strikes up conversations with new people. He is what one would initially call good company when spending an evening among friends over a few bottles of beer. However, this is exactly where Ismo's dark side shows. When he drinks, he quickly becomes aggressive. He can't handle jokes at his expense, let alone insults and arguments. Then a pronounced need for revenge awakens in him, which leads him to completely disproportionate actions. All the victims died from base motives. Ismo killed out of envy because he felt attacked or provoked. In possession of his full presence of mind, he is both aware of his actions and their deadly consequences. Ismo is sentenced to 9 years in prison for the manslaughter of his wife and later to 6 years for assault resulting in death. He receives life sentences for each of the arsons and the 4 murders of Matti, Seppo, Juha, and Polly. Ismo serves just under 4 years of his sentence until he is admitted to the Helsinki hospital in 1995. At the age of 51, his heart no longer receives sufficient blood flow. Only a bypass operation can save his life. The surgeons do their best, but complications arise. Ismo Juni does not wake up from the general anesthesia. The name Simon Juni is invented. It is unknown what Ismo's son's real name is, where he lives, and how he regards his father. Chapter 12. God. His blood is dark red. Like streams in stormy weather, it shoots out of the wounds that Jarno had inflicted on him earlier with scissors. 3 times he has rammed the sharp blades into his left side. He has tied him to the radiator with duct tape for his safety. His dog is large and has a firm bite. Never in years of living together has he made use of it, but Jarno knows. The survival instincts of any living creature are stronger than anything else. The animal makes unbearable sounds. It screams and whines in a tone that Jarno has never heard before. It gasps for breath. In its dark brown, large eyes, Jarno sees mortal fear, but also astonishment. The attack was completely unexpected for the dog. Smiling, Jarno reaches for the metal bar lying on the ground next to him. Without hesitation, he hits the animal on the head 3 times. The whimpering stops abruptly. It is dead silent. Jarno drops the rod and looks at the lifeless animal, whose head is now only a grayish, blood-red, smeared mass. Jarno's throaty laugh breaks the silence. He has decided. He is his own god. Tarje exhales heavily. Looking up, he gazes into the equally tense faces of his 3 friends and colleagues. The 4 young men are on a mission. They want to help alcoholic youths find the right path. For them, the right path is the path with God. As volunteers of the Pentecostal Church in Järvenpää, they regularly open the doors of the Christian institution for young people. Their fates touch Tarje deeply. The region north of Helsinki spreads a harmonious glow. The vast landscapes, lush green fields in summer, and magical snowy landscapes in winter. No one is surprised that life satisfaction in Scandinavia is higher than anywhere else in the world. But this appearance is deceptive, for there are black spots in the idyll. Tarje gets to know exactly these, the lost people who cloud the statistics. Sexual abuse, violence, and humiliation find their way through every shining landscape, through every layer of snow, no matter how high. They don't knock timidly, but smash doors, sometimes even entire walls. That's what it feels like for those affected. In alcohol, many find a quick and easy solution. A few sips that warm them from the inside and shield them on the outside from the reality they can no longer stand. Tarje and his colleagues meet the lost souls they encounter in their missionary work with trust and empathy. A few alcoholic youths actually joined the Pentecostal church afterwards. They turned in time on their way after all and arrived that way. The encounters are not always as pleasant as in these cases. Most of the time, the missionaries do not hear from the visitors after the initial meeting. But never before has there been a meeting like today. It is a typical Finnish Saturday evening in November. It has been raining and storming for days, and even on this November 21, 1998, the clouds hang low in the sky. At this time of the year, it does not get light in Finland. The days are full of night. So Tarje and his colleagues do not notice how time passes. They sit in the tea room of the Pentecostal church and review the day. The clock on the wall above the kettle shows 10 p.m. Time to clean up and go home. As Tarje puts his teacup in the dishwasher, he hears loud voices. There are several of them. They sound slurred, and they come closer. He looks around questioningly, but his colleagues also shrug their shoulders. Tarje takes heart and runs to the door. "Hello?" he calls. "Can we be of assistance?" A few moments later, the voices turn into faces. They belong to 4 young men and 1 woman. All wear their hair long, black, and loose. It falls straggly onto their pale faces. The woman's eyes are ice blue and outlined with thick black eyeliner. Her lips are also painted pitch black. The only splashes of color are the lettering of the band's logos, which stand out from their dark shirts. Tarje is not familiar with any of these bands, but he sees from the typical lettering that they must be black metal groups. One of the men is a bit taller and stronger than the rest of the group. A long beard hangs down from his chin. It is he who answers Tarje, "We need to talk about your faith." Tarje hesitates. The 4 are obviously drunk. To that end, they clearly embody what is spreading fear and terror throughout the country right now, the satanic panic. This refers to what is known as a moral anxiety, a social phenomenon in which a social group is perceived by the public as dangerous to order and morality because of its behavior. Tarje's gaze falls back to the shirts of the visitors. He knows that many black metal bands spread satanic content in their songs. One of his colleagues clears his throat. Tarje can imagine that his friend is afraid. The atmosphere is strangely tense. He does not feel well either and would like to crawl home to his warm bed. But just at that moment, he dismisses the thought again because he remembers his faith and his mission. It is precisely these people who need his help the most. "Sit down," he therefore says, earning suspicious looks from his colleagues. The man with the long beard goes ahead and sits down on one of the wooden chairs. With his arms folded, he begins the conversation. Christianity is the purest waste of time. Tarje swallows hard. Still, he lets him speak, even when the man quotes from the Church of Satan. Satan represents pride, freedom, and individualism. These are qualities often degraded as evil by those who worship external deities. We Satanists are our own gods. We are benevolent gods who give love to those who deserve it, and we make those who tempt us to do so feel our wrath. This is not easy for the Christian missionaries to hear. They quickly realize that they are getting nowhere with their argumentation. But to their positive surprise, the conversation is completely nonviolent. 4 of the guests sit quietly while the apparent leader of the group speaks. After about an hour, however, even he seems to realize that this conversation is going nowhere. The group leaves the Pentecostal church. Relieved, Tarje and his colleagues also make their way home a few minutes later. "Fuck the Christians, fuck God, I am my own God," proclaims Jarno Elg shortly after they leave the Pentecostal church. It should have been clear to him that he cannot change the minds of the ordinary missionaries. In his opinion, they are already too blinded by the Bible and the church. Who knows what the pastor drills into them on Sundays during the service? But the alcohol has made him talkative. At least now the guys know that there are other people who are not impressed by them. "Exactly," his girlfriend Terhi agrees with him. "Nothing but foreign-controlled they are. That's no kind of life." Jarno puts his arm around her. Who would have thought that he would find his soulmate already at the age of 23? But in 17-year-old Terhi, he recognizes exactly that. He's glad she's back. Just a few weeks ago, she was released from psychiatric treatment. She has been addicted to alcohol and mentally unstable since the 9th grade. In Jarno, she now finds her support. Together with her 3 friends, Mika, Lars, and Till, they stagger to the train station in Järvenpää. But friends is not exactly the right word. Jarno met 20-year-old Mika during one of his stays in a psychiatric ward. Since then, the two have been inseparable. Already during the group therapy sessions, Jarno noticed that Mika also had the absolute urge and conviction to live a self-determined life, a life without regard for the legal system and social orders. Most people only exist. You can't call the everyday run in the hamster wheel life. After a few conversations with Mika, Jarno was able to convince him of Satanism. For him, it is the only true meaning of life. 23-year-old Till and 16-year-old Lars have not been part of the group for long, but they share his beliefs. Jarno knows that Till has no job and is as addicted to alcohol as he is. Sometimes they also take drugs. Till no longer has any contact with his family and no friends. He is a typical outsider who has now found a connection in the Satanist group. All Jarno knows about Lars so far is that he dropped out of school and has no fixed abode. Whether his parents are dead or have simply abandoned their son, Lars has never said. Actually, Jarno doesn't care either. Anyway, everyone should rely only on themselves. Shortly after midnight, Jarno, Terhi, Mika, Till, and Lars arrive at Jarno's apartment in Hyvinka. The host is thirsty. It is a thirst that has lasted for years and does not seem to dry up. He pounces on the open bottle sitting on the coffee table. Terhi comes up to him. She wants a drink too. Jarno hands her the bottle, and his girlfriend takes a big sip of the kilju, a Finnish sugar wine. Mika, Till, and Lars drink beer. Mika keeps looking intensely at Jarno as they do so. He remembers how they met. The two were in psychiatric treatment at the time because of their alcohol addiction. While therapy once again did not help Mika, he found fulfillment in Jarno, who is 3 years older than him. For Mika, he is a born leader and an inspiration. He lives his life free from any conventions. His guiding principle is Satanism. It allows him to be his own god. Again and again, Mika hears this from Jarno's mouth, including this evening. Jarno has already announced before their trip to the city that he wants to play them the new album of Ancient tonight. The Norwegian black metal band has created a masterpiece with The Chronicle of Cain, according to Jarno. The first notes resound, dark basses, distorted guitars, to a rough voice. The five listen to the music together. In between, Jarno explains to the rest of the group that the lyrics are about the biblical story of Cain and Abel. Cain killed his brother in order to sacrifice him. He adds that the band uses the lyrics to make a reference to Satanism. Everyone listens to Jarno's fiery sermon with fascination. Mika notices the skull ring on one finger of the wildly gesticulating hand. After an hour, the exuberant mood suddenly tips over. It's Till, slurring his words and yelling that he doesn't like the music. Terhi, Mika, and Lars look at him, startled. Jarno's gaze darkens. Till violates 2 important rules of the 11 satanic principles with his behavior. He ignores principle number 1 and 3. 1. Express your opinion or advice only when asked. 3. If you are in someone else's den, show him respect or do not go there. Immediately, the 4th principle appears in Jarno's mind's eye. 4. If a guest behaves inappropriately in your cave, meet him harshly and without mercy. Jarno makes a decision. He is his own god. In 4 weeks, it will be Christmas. These are Malta's last thoughts as he makes his way to the Hyvinka landfill on this November 24, 1998. His wife has asked him to dispose of the electrical waste. Every year, she starts her holiday preparations early and thoroughly cleans the house before putting up the Christmas decorations. Every year, some items have to leave the house, and every year it's Malta who does the disposal at the landfill. But this year, Malta doesn't throw the garbage bag into the dumpster with any momentum and then makes his way back home. This year, he falters before disposing of the trash in the large container. At first, he thinks the object inside is part of a mannequin. But since when are a mannequin's legs covered in thick hair? Malta retches when he realizes that there is a severed human leg in front of him. Shortly afterwards, the police rush directly to the place where it was found. The rest of the body is not in the garbage can. The case is immediately treated as a murder investigation, even though the officers have no experience in this direction. A murder has never happened in Hyvinkää. Forensic experts examine the leg. It is a left leg that has been severed from the thigh. The cut is not a medical professional one. It is uneven. Based on the hair on the leg, the medics assume that the victim is male and between 20 and 60 years old. However, nothing is certain at this point. The body part could also have belonged to a woman. In order to be able to determine the victim more closely, the leg alone is not sufficient. The investigation, therefore, focused on the search for other body parts. The search operation of the following days puts the idyllic residential area of Hyvinkää into turmoil. Officers spend days at the landfill searching through mountains of waste. With their bare hands, they comb through every container, every sack, and every cardboard box. The head of the investigation, Ari Sorinen, calls in students from the police academy to help deal with the stinking piles of garbage. During the nights, Finnish soldiers stand guard to prevent unauthorized persons from gaining access to the site. Cadaver-sniffing dogs support the unsuccessful search. The officers, led by Ari Sorinen, are desperate. It is their task to return to the residents of Hyvinkää their security, the feeling that was previously normality in the village. After a long week of searching, one of the sniffer dogs strikes. The officers find a piece of unwrapped human abdominal tissue. Tissue analysis yields important findings that move the investigation forward decisively. The DNA from the abdominal tissue and the leg match. The victim is male, between 20 and 30 years old, and was heavily intoxicated at the time of his death. Deposits on the tissue suggest that the man was basically drinking heavily while alive. Investigators believe that the victim must have been living on the fringes of society and on welfare. Not a single missing person report has been received to date. The dead man does not seem to be missing to anyone. Ari Saronin's team has no experience with murder cases, but they get right on the right track. They learn from the welfare authorities that there is indeed a man who has not been cashing his welfare checks for days. The man in question is 23-year-old Till from Hyvinkää. The coroner's office was able to narrow down the time of death to last weekend. Till was seen together with a group on Saturday evening. The members of this group are described to investigators as unpleasant. Just like Till himself, they were probably Satanists. Till's neighbors consider the young man to be a loner and an outsider. He never actually leaves the house and never gets visitors. When the officers contact his parents, they reply unimpressed that they have had no regular contact with their son for years. The investigation quickly leads the police officers to the Pentecostal church in Järvenpää. The young man they talk to introduces himself to them as Tarje. He is a Christian missionary who helps fight alcohol addiction among local youth. When the investigators show him a photo of Till, Tarje confirms that he was at the church with 4 other young people last Saturday night. He reports the conversation and the group's affiliation with Satanism, but also that Till himself said nothing. He says that only one of the men spoke, a tall, burly one with a goatee. The policemen thank Tarje and go to the scene of Satanism, which is popular among young people at that time. They are shocked when they get direct answers to their questions. Till has actually been murdered. His friends, led by one Jarno Elg, sacrificed him to Satan. The deed was the ultimate confession for Jarno, a proof of loyalty for his followers to Satanism. That is why he has been proudly telling about it in the scene for days. On December 8, 1998, the investigators arrest Jarno, Terhi, Mika, and Lars. They find Till's DNA everywhere in Jarno's apartment, on the floor, on the walls, and on the ceiling. If they didn't know about the case, they would have assumed from the sheer amount of blood that several people had died here. Sitting in front of Ari Sorinen are young people who have clearly lost their way. They are alcoholics, some of them drug addicts, unemployed, and rebelling against law and order. But the investigator also notices that all 3 are intelligent. All the more terrible and serious is what he learns in the course of the questioning. A fight has broken out. Till did not adhere to the principles and was disrespectful. He criticized the music and, worse, did not understand the deeper meaning in it. Jarno hit him, whereupon Till became even more quick-tempered. At Jarno's command, Mika and Lars then put a studded belt around his neck. Till had to crawl on all fours in front of the group like a dog. At the word dog, Jarno laughs and recounts, as if it were an anecdote, that he had sacrificed his pet in a similar fashion a month earlier. Ari Saronen does not interrupt him once. He is deeply shocked, but has studied the subject of Satanism. He knows about the 11 principles, which is why the 10th occurs to him at this point in the narrative. 10. Do not kill non-human animals unless they attack you or you need them for food. Ari Saronen focuses on Jarno again as he continues with his narration. Mika, Lars, and he took turns urinating on Till. They had drunk a lot of alcohol. The urge to urinate was great. All 4, including Terhi, hit him several times. A hot iron bar was also used. At some point, Jarno was disturbed by Till's screaming, whereupon he hit him on the head with a pair of scissors. Till lost consciousness. Meanwhile, at Jarno's request, Mika and Lars closed the unconscious man's mouth with tape. But apparently this task was too difficult for them because the tape slipped. When he regained consciousness, Till pleaded for his life and promised that he would not tell anyone about what had happened if they let him go now. Again, Jarno laughs and describes Till as a coward. This time, Mika and Lars got it right and wrapped Till's entire head with duct tape. Ari Saronen gulps. Till could no longer breathe and suffocated. After his death, Jarno cut out Till's heart and intestines. He smiles while he talks about it and points with his hands to his belly for illustration. After that, they cut off the corpse's penis. The ceremony also included eating parts of the victim. Using a knife, they cut the flesh from the dead body and ate it raw. When they were done, they decapitated the victim and played with the severed head, throwing it to each other like a ball. It wasn't until late that night that Mika and Lars left the scene. When Jarno and Terhi woke up the next morning, they didn't remember where they had put the head. Finally, Terhi found it in a closet. To get rid of what was left of the body, they moved the remains to the bathroom and sawed them into pieces, which they stuffed into garbage bags and disposed of in various trash cans around town. Jarno recounts the events of Saturday night to Ari Saronen, not only willingly, but with pride in his voice. Quite the opposite of his girlfriend. Terhi affirms that they never intended to kill Till. They had all been drunk and unaware that he would suffocate from the tape on his mouth and nose. When they finally realized that Till was dead, they had to do something. Cutting up the body seemed like the easiest solution. Mika testifies that he was under the influence of alcohol and had merely followed Jarno's orders. He had not eaten any of the body parts. He had only hit Till a few times before that. The 16-year-old Lars states that he was forced by the others to take part in the crime. Out of fear, he participated, but left the apartment before the body was dismembered. Jarno, Terhi, and Mika remain in custody until the trial begins. For Lars, a conviction is out of the question because he is a minor. He is sent directly to a closed psychiatric ward. Jarno's psychological report shows that he is fully conscious and has acted knowingly. The trial begins in August 1999. At the request of the lawyers, the proceedings take place in camera. Journalists and reporters are only allowed to be present during the first hour. As Jarno enters the courtroom, silence falls in the pews. The terrible deed is firmly anchored in everyone's memory. Everyone has their own images in their head. He wears his hair and beard unchanged. For his clothing, he has chosen a band shirt and a red plaid, loose-fitting shirt. With his head held high, he sits down. He grins. Whenever he notices that a camera is pointed at him, he shows his middle finger, or the heavy metal salute, with raised index and little finger. Terhi has her black hair tied up tightly and wears no makeup. She has not been together with Jarno for some time. The court decides that the case should be subject to a reporting ban. Only 40 years later, in 2038, may details about the investigation, the trial, and the victim be revealed. At this point, in the midst of the satanic panic, the court does not want to alienate the public. Besides, the danger for copycat offenders would be too high. However, the sentences will be announced to the public on August 11, 1999. Mika is sentenced to 2 years and 8 months in prison for accessory to murder and desecration of corpses. Terhi gets 8 years and 6 months as an accomplice, and Jarno's sentence as the mastermind is life in prison. Mika is the only one of the 3 perpetrators to have served his entire sentence. Since his release, he has had no criminal record apart from drunk driving. Terhi was released in 2003 after 4 years in prison. In 2007, she commits another murder. She kills an acquaintance in an argument with a garden knife. Since more than 3 years had passed without a crime before, she was considered a first offender under Finnish law at the time and received only half the sentence. In prison, she meets a murderer and falls in love with him. After her release in 2017, they move to northern Finland and start a family. Death is rebirth. The end brings new beginning, ever turning the wheel of the pagan cycle. Death is rebirth. The end brings new beginning, ever turning the wheel of the pagan cycle, reads one of the songs from the Kanian Chronicle. Jarno was released on parole in 2016. Today, he is a free man. He has caught up on his schooling and works full-time. Where he lives, what his personal life is like, and whether he continues to identify with these song lyrics is unknown. Note: due to the reporting ban, the victim's name has never been disclosed. Till is a fictitious name. Chapter 13. In Front of a Closed Door. The democracy and unity of our society are supporting values based not on the equality of all, but on respect for the humanity and mind of every other individual. Sauli Niinisto, 12th President of the Republic of Finland. Lee Anderson takes a big gulp of water as the first audience members enter the spacious meeting room of the Jyväskylä City Library. As chairwoman of the Left Youth, she is used to speaking in front of people, presenting her ideas, and addressing critical questions. She owes her outward composure to this habit. The young woman is on fire for her job, which revolves around her ideas of values and justice in a modern world. This passion is paying off. At just 24, she was elected chairwoman of the Left Youth. But speaking in front of large crowds still triggers unfounded stage fright in her. "Are you all right?" she hears Mikhail Brunila ask. The young man is a journalist and activist for social issues and environmental protection. "Yes, thank you," Lee replies, smiling. She is glad to have Mikhail by her side today. The young man is tall, slim, and almost always wears a cap over his tousled dark blonde hair. He radiates security and calm, which also transfers to Lee. She brushes a blonde strand behind her ear and looks at the book lying on the lectern, her book. It is entitled The Extreme Right in Finland. Lee wrote it together with Mikhail. The third author, Dan Koivulakso, is not present today. As a city councillor for the Left Alliance in Helsinki, his schedule does not allow for a book presentation at the public library. But he knows he can rely on Lee and Mikhail. The topics of right-wing radicalism in Finland is more topical than ever. The Nordic resistance movement spreads radical right-wing ideas throughout Scandinavia and captivates a large part of the youth with populist slogans. In addition, the branch of the Finnish resistance movement is up to mischief in Finland. They recognize white people as a superior race and fight for traditional role and family images. Adolf Hitler is a role model for them. For Lee, Mikhail, and Dan, it is a matter of the heart to educate society about this movement and its dangers. Their book was recently published, and today, January 30, 2013, Lee and Mikhail are presenting it at the public library in Jyväskylä, a university town 300 kilometers north of Helsinki. On the way to the event, The two were still talking about a right-wing extremist incident a few months ago. There was no way around it. Because the tragedy that happened just a few towns away is directly related to today's event. On July 19, 2012, a fellow activist was speaking at an LGBTQ parade about violence against minorities when a young man literally jumped on him and sprayed pepper spray in his face at close range. While the speaker was writhing in pain, the perpetrator aimed his spray bottle at the crowd and pulled the trigger. 20 innocent people were injured. The man used the seconds of utter horror on parade to disappear unnoticed. Lee, Mikhail, and Dan were horrified by the physical violence and the attack against freedom of political expression. As authors who clearly speak out against right-wing extremist terror, they too had already experienced hostility. So far, however, these have been limited to the online world. When they announced their book on Facebook, they were met with resentment, rejection, and insults. One of the users even calls the book a betrayal of the state. Mikhail, Lee, and Dan agree. This hatred is just one more reason to get their book out to the people and prevent worse things from happening by educating them. Nevertheless, the police have been informed before the book launch and bouncers have been organized. Nothing stands in the way of a safe event. Only a few minutes left until 6 p.m., the start of the event. During the day, the sun has shown itself, which is a real rarity at this time of year. The warm, bright rays have lured many people out of their homes on this winter day. Many of them are also drawn to Lee and Mikhail's event. By now, about 200 people occupy the hall, and the doors are closed. There is no longer any sign of the sun's rays. Now glaring neon lights flood the audience. A spotlight is directed at Lee and Mikhail. "Good evening. I'm glad to see so many of you here tonight." Lee opens the event. After a few sentences, she is in her element. Mikhail and she explain the need for her book and its contents. The guests listen intently. In between, the authors involve them, ask questions, and get talking. The beginning of the evening is a complete success until screams are heard from outside and an attempt is made to break down the door by force. Shortly after Lee and Mikhail have greeted the audience, Arno closes the door of the hall. He thinks about the pepper spray attack a few months ago and how crazy right-wing terror is. What kind of people are these who think patriarchally in this day and age, declare entire ethnic groups to be inferior, and are as critical of the European Union as they are of climate change? He has already accompanied many events and attended to the doors of many halls. As a doorman, he comes into contact with all kinds of people. But today's event interests him personally. He takes it upon himself to read the speaker's book. As he is about to sit down on the small chair to the right of the door, he hears a beeping sound coming from his belt. His radio makes itself heard. It's the receptionist at the public library. 3 men have just entered the building, and they seem strange to him. One of them is wearing goggles, gloves, and a bulletproof vest. The other is carrying a bag full of empty glass bottles, and the third is walking behind him with a digital camera. He said they are relatively young, of medium height, and with strong builds. He said he had already notified the police, but they would not come for now. The situation was not a clear danger. "Best keep an eye on the 3 anyway. I think they want to get into the hall," speculates the doorman, and he should be right. Arno sees the threesome from a distance. Without saying a word, they approach him with firm steps. "Good evening," Arno greets them in a calm, low voice. "The event has already begun. I'm afraid I can no longer let you in." 3 pairs of dark eyes twinkle at him, but no one says a word. Seconds pass, and if Arno had a pair of scissors, he could cut the air. Suddenly, he feels a pain in his face and takes a brief moment to realize what just happened. It was the fist of the man with the bulletproof vest that hit him quite abruptly. While Arno is still holding his cheek, one of his colleagues rushes toward the troublemakers. "Hands off the door," he shouts. The 3 try to gain access to the hall, but they make no headway. Apparently, the startled onlookers from inside are holding out against them. "Pull yourself together," Arno, meanwhile, talks to himself for courage, still standing beside himself. He has never experienced such an escapade in his 20-year career as a security guard. While his colleague tries in vain to talk to the three men, Arno contacts the doorman with his radio. "Call the police. Those three are insane." More long minutes pass, and there is no sign of the police. Arno hears the roar inside the hall through the massive wooden doors as the attackers continue to rattle the door. The onlookers seem to be getting scared. Who knows how much longer they will manage to keep the door closed, or what else the three men have in their luggage to gain entry by force. Arno hears his colleague inform the three about the police and how one of the men then attacks him with a glass bottle. He draws his baton and fights back. Without hesitation, Arno steps in to help. He grabs the chair that has fallen to the floor after the punch and throws it at the three young men. He hits them in their midst, but no one is hurt. Then everything happens very quickly. Arno's colleague falls to the ground, and the three men suddenly run away. At first, the guard is surprised by the intruder's change of heart. Why, when they so urgently wanted to get into the hall, did they now flee? Have they perhaps heard the emergency call to the police? But then he realizes his colleague is bleeding. One of the men has stabbed him in the upper body with a knife. Arno answers all the questions put to him by the police, who arrive shortly afterwards. At the same time, his colleague is driven to the hospital. It later turns out that his injuries are not life-threatening. The attacker with the knife is quickly suspected of having committed the pepper spray attack in July 2012. The motive is therefore, in all likelihood, a right-wing extremist one. They wanted to disrupt the book launch. Arno doesn't even want to imagine how far they would have gone. The policeman puts a hand on his shoulder. He said he shouldn't worry. Thanks to the surveillance camera footage, they will find the three of them. Some witnesses who saw the three escape are being questioned at the same time. In fact, the very next day, the investigators arrest two of the perpetrators, Bernd Larsen and Marcus Linninge. There is no trace of Simon Lumo, who beat one bouncer and injured another with a knife. The arrested men are both from Jyväskylä. The 17-year-old Marcus Linninge testifies that he did not know Simon Lumo. He had followed his friend Marcus, who had suggested the trip to the public library. There had never been any talk of a violent plan. In that case, he would not have joined the other two. Since he himself did not use violence against the bouncers, and is a minor, the investigators let him go. Bernd Larsen does not know where Simon Lumo is. After escaping from the building, they parted ways. While searching his apartment and belongings, the officers come across a USB stick with a database of 300 people they created themselves, including photos and personal information. In the process, Lumen divides the people on his USB stick into groups based on ethnicity, religious background, and political views. Thus, the investigators find groups called Jews, or the elite. Lee and Mikhail comment on the incidents of the previous evening on the same day. The young author praises the audience because it was only thanks to them that the perpetrators were prevented from entering the hall, thus preventing worse physical violence. Lee calls for a just verdict in her statement. The goal of these people is apparently to make politically motivated violence something normal. For this reason, it is now extremely important that the judiciary stand up for freedom of expression and recognize the political nature of this neo-national socialist attack. But in January 2014, Simon Lumo is still on the run. The district court arranges for him to be tried in absentia, and the police put a finder's fee on him. Simon Lumo has been considered a fugitive since the attack during the LGBTQ event in July 2012. He has since been identified by the victim and the event organizer as the perpetrator with the pepper spray. On a cold winter day in November 2014, a man attacks a young mother who was taking her child on an outing to a playground near Helsinki. He knocks her down and steals her purse. Shortly after, police arrest Simon Lumo as the perpetrator, a fortunate oversight because a few weeks later they pick up the mother's real attacker. Simon did not actually attack the woman, but looks very much like the real perpetrator. The trial of Bernd Larsson and Simon Lumo takes place in January 2015. Lumo is found guilty on all charges for the pepper spray attack in July 2012 and for the stabbing in the Jyväskylä Public Library in January 2013. His sentence is 1.5 years probation. Larsson is sentenced to a fine of 50 daily fines of €300 each. In addition, he must pay compensation to all of the 300 people in his personal database, totaling $15,600. For their protection, the police had informed the individuals concerned of their entry in the database, which caused mass panic as no one knew what Larsson intended to do with the information or the individuals themselves. Lumo's and Larsson's convictions do not constitute a cautionary tale for the supporters of the Finnish resistance movement. On September 10, 2016, the Nordic resistance movement was holding a protest in Helsinki when a young man walked past the group. Jimmy Karttunen has nothing but resentment for the radical right-wing ideas and voices his displeasure loudly as he walks by, spitting on the ground in front of the protesters. One of the neo-Nazis then jumps on him and kicks him so hard in the chest that Jimmy falls to the ground, hitting his head on the hard concrete of the street. He is observed in the hospital and released after a few days. A week later, he dies as a result of the impact. The attacker is sentenced to 2 years and 3 months in prison. The whole of Helsinki is in an uproar after this tragic incident and organizes a demonstration against politically motivated violence. Politicians also react and ban the Finnish resistance movement in 2018 as it violates the Finnish Associations Act. According to this, associations may not act against the law and good behavior. The decision is met with criticism as banning the association interferes with political freedom of expression. Despite protests, the decision to ban the association still stands today. Chapter 14, A Strong Woman, by Heikki Schlosser and Kain Gneid, the True Crime Podcast. Virpi Sanna Sinikka Butt was born in Finland on August 9, 1972. Almost nothing is known about her childhood, but it may not have been as simple and sheltered as one would wish for a child. At the age of 16, she had already given birth for the first time, the boy's father being publicly unknown. Her interests differ from those of girls the same age. Butt's focus is largely on bodybuilding and body worship. In order to achieve her goals, she does not shy away from taking anabolic steroids. But who could have guessed that the athletic young woman would become part of one of the cruelest acts in Finnish criminal history? The urge to toughen her body beyond natural capabilities quickly becomes an addiction for Virpi Butt. Her consumption of illegal substances increases, and she soon reaches a dose of steroids that exceeds the dosage of an adult man by a factor of 10. In 1993, her bodybuilding career seemed to have reached its peak. As Timanti, English diamond, Virpi became part of the TV series Gladiatorit, which is also known as American Gladiator on international television. In the Finnish version of one of the most successful formats of the 1990s, Butt competes in athletic contests against the show's contestants. She is considered one of the strongest and most powerful gladiators on the series. The 21-year-old is only signed on for the second of 3 seasons, and so her television career ends after just 1 year. The once radiant diamond falls prey not only to alcohol, but also to drugs and tranquilizers. Virpi had her second son in 2000, with the father not being known to the public again. In 2002, she lives with her 2 sons in a small apartment in Tampere, a large city in the south of Finland. She is well known in the local bars, not only for her excessive drinking, but especially for her fights with other bar patrons. Her violence regularly leads to fights in which the trained bodybuilder often gets the upper hand against her male opponents. Her brotherly friend, Jana Hivonen, is always in on the action. The man, who is 3 years younger than her, spends most of his time with Virpi Butt. Apparently there has never been a sexual relationship between the two, yet Jana plagues herself with jealousy whenever Virpi has a man by her side. This was the case during Virpi's relationship with Kari-Pekka Antonen at the time. The 29-year-old programmer had been friends with Virpi since the 1990s, but the two had lost track of each other. After Antonen and his girlfriend broke up in 2001, he began drowning his depression, which had intensified as a result, in alcohol. Along the way, the two friends reconnected and not only got to know each other better again, but also fell in love. On the evening of May 29, 2002, the three friends find themselves in a bar called Sputnik after 2 full nights of heavy drinking. There, too, they are well known, and the alcohol is being consumed in great quantities. Antonen, who was responsible for paying for the drinks that night, passes out shortly after midnight. The past evenings take their toll. An old bar rule says that if you've already had too much to drink, you'll only bring trouble and no money. So, the trio has to leave the tavern. Butt and Hivonen carry Antonen, who keeps slumping, out of the bar. Because of his poor condition, they do not want to go back to his apartment, as they had originally planned. It is located on a hill and is therefore more difficult to reach than Virpi Butt's flat, which is a little further away but easier to reach. Her 2 children sleep in her apartment, but this is no obstacle for the drunks. In Butt's living room, where her little 2-year-old son is sleeping, they continue their lively drinking binge. The 14-year-old boy sleeps in a converted closet in the next room. It is probably around 3 in the morning when Hivonen loses control. How exactly the situation escalated is something no one will be able to remember later, or want to. An argument, a scuffle, a wrong word. We can only speculate about the motive of the act. The bottom line is that Hivonen felt provoked. He stabs the unsuspecting Antonen in the back with a knife. When Antonen falls forward, Hivonen sits on his victim and stabs him in the back several times with a second blade. Later he will testify that he felt like a sewing machine when he did this. When Antonen is miraculously still alive after the excessive attack, Hivonen slashes his throat with the larger of the 2 knives and a deep cut. The toddler is in the room the whole time. Virpi Butt and Jana Hivonen begin to clean up the blood-stained crime scene. Together they carry Antonen's body into the bathroom. The task now is to get rid of it as quickly as possible. On the way to the bathroom, they meet Virpi Butt's older son. He remains silent at the sight of the corpse. In search of a suitable solution for the disposal of the dead body, the murderous friends phone their way through their circle of acquaintances, as neither of them owns a suitable means of transport. No one wants to support them in their operation because Butt and Hivonen make no secret of what needs to be transported. However, nobody seems to be taking them seriously because the police don't receive any tips. They have to find another way out of the situation. Jana Hivonen goes to his apartment to get some tools. The new plan involves dismembering the body. Back in Virpi Butt's bathroom, the head is now completely severed, the fingertips are cut off, tattoos are removed. At first, the two work with a hunting knife. However, when cutting off the legs at the knees, it proves not to be sharp enough, so a saw is used. They pack the parts of the body in 3 garbage bags, which they temporarily store on the balcony of the apartment. Again, Hivonen tries his luck with a call to his friend. 3 garbage bags need to be picked up, he says, and he needs help transporting them. When the friend wants to know what is in the bags, Jana can't help but speak the truth. He had beaten someone to death, he says bluntly on the phone. On that note, the desired help wouldn't cooperate, and so the sacks remain on the balcony. After the body parts are not taken from them, the perfidious thoughts of the murderous duo seem to increase immeasurably. Virpi unwraps her dead partner's head again and places it in the kitchen next to the oven to display it like a trophy. Hivonen, meanwhile, has a very different idea. He takes Antonen's legs, puts them in the oven with a little salt and spices, as he later states, and cooks them. He then eats parts of them. His accomplice doesn't join in on the eating. Instead, she calls a friend and asks her to come over. When the friend arrives unsuspectingly, Virpi but laughingly presents her with the dead man's head. The friend is horrified and cannot share Butt's humor. This makes Virpi falter as she suddenly realizes the risk of the situation. With some effort, she convinces her friend that it is only the head of a doll, a prop, and therefore nothing to worry about. Her friend is reassured, and no report is made to the police. In the following days, the two show neither sorrow nor doubts for their doing. Driven by pride, they brag about the murder in relevant bars in the city of Tampere. They also make no secret of the fact that the head still adorns Virpi's kitchen. No one believes them. Not even when they show up at a bar with a wet plastic bag, tell the story, and claim that the head is inside. Virpi proudly places the sack on a bar stool, swings herself onto the one next to it, and puts her feet on the dripping sack. Some visitors decide to leave the bar. The head has importance to both murderers. While it seems to be the ultimate trophy for Butt, Hivonen wants to continue to ravage it as if the remains of the dead programmer were his toy. Days later, he stands in the kitchen once again indulging in alcohol. Hivonen gets the idea to cook the head. He takes a pan, fills it with water, and puts the head in. When the facial features become distorted by the heat and turn into a grinning grimace, Hivonen laughs. He then removes the head's teeth for no reason, knocking them out piece by piece. A feeling of complete power flows through Jana Hivonen. He has murdered, he has dismembered, he has eaten, he is capable of anything. It almost seems as if Hivonen and Butt, in their intoxication, have forgotten that the remaining pieces of the corpse are still lying on the balcony of the flat. Inevitably, the bags begin to stink considerably after a while. It is not possible to wait any longer. More calls bring to light an acquaintance who is willing to dispose of the rubbish. This time the killers do not reveal what the real contents of the bags are. The driver, who will remain anonymous, believes they are hot goods to get rid of, but the smell speaks a different language. Because of the foul stench, the man refuses to drive the bags the planned distance to Nokia, 20 minutes away. Instead, he helps distribute the bags to nearby dumpsters while Virpi and Jana brag about their violent behavior and laugh at their own numerous jokes. This man, who unintendedly becomes an accomplice, does not go to the police either. Kari-Pekka Antonen is reported missing. It remains unclear who makes the report to the police, but in the course of the investigation, the investigators also knock on the doors of Hivonen and Butt. As close as the police would be to solving the murder, the interviews do not provide the investigators with any helpful information. There is apparently no reason for an arrest, and so both remain at large. Virpi and Jana's lives return to the usual rut of alcohol and drugs for only a short time. Butt's landlord throws them out of the flat only a short time after the murder. Her alcohol excesses are too extreme, her lifestyle too neglected. Virpi's threats don't help either. She and her children have to move out. The landlord has to have the flat triple cleaned to put it back into an acceptable condition. The new place is not far from her old home, so Virpi can at least continue to visit her usual bars. Midsummer is traditionally celebrated in Finland in June, a particularly traditional and boisterous festival with lots of partying and even more drinking. What was originally a pagan celebration in honor of the deity Ukko is now a joyous revelry with good food, bonfires, and alcohol. On 20 June 2003, Jana Hivonen cares for Virpi Butt's two sons while she goes shopping for alcohol for the upcoming midsummer. Her path, however, does not lead her to the shopping mall as planned. Instead, she ends up in a bar, as she often does. Here she meets Arto Malinen, a 26-year-old who has lived in Pirkala near Tampere for 3 years. The young man has been on a midsummer pub crawl for 3 days. The two hit it off right away and leave the bar together after closing time at 3:30 a.m. They take a taxi to Malinen's flat, which they reach shortly after 4. Butt pays for the taxi. The two spend a night together, only to start again the next day where they left off, drinking. Together with a friend of Virpi's, who will be called Emma in the following, they visit another bar. The ambience is jolly. There is a lot of laughter and even more drinking. However, after it turns out that Virpi Butt has been banned from the bar because of her past, the group is abruptly forced to leave. On the street, they meet a young drug addict, later called Mika, who is looking for a cannabis dealer. They start talking and seem to get on well with each other. The already completely drunk Arto Malinen does not talk back when Butt claims that there is still cannabis in his flat that Mika can buy. The four of them squeeze into a taxi and drive to Malinen's flat in Pirkkala. The taxi ride is not nearly as cheerful as the previous mood would have suggested. Malinen's condition no longer permits any sensible actions. His attempts to kiss Butt are met with violence and disgust on her part. He also falls asleep again and again. Mika is skeptical about Virpi's radical attempts to keep him awake. He finds this extremely violent and strange, and obviously feels that it is necessary to calm Virpi Butt down. He offers her diazepam. This is a benzodiazepine that is used for mental agitation, such as anxiety disorders, or to calm patients before surgery. When they arrive at Malinen's flat, Emma and Virpi go to the kitchen to have something to eat and more to drink, while the two men complete, or try to complete, the drug deal. Malinen, who is drunk beyond belief, hands Mika a packet of matches instead of a box of drugs. That's the last straw for Mika. He feels betrayed and demands $20 for a taxi ride back to Tampere. The mood changes abruptly. While Arto Malinen is struggling with a guilty conscience and desperately looking for cannabis to save the situation, Butt finds a knife in the kitchen. She says to Emma, who is about to go to the bathroom, "There'll be another dead body here today." The argument escalates. In desperation, Malinen reaches for Mika's throat, but suddenly falters and cries out, "Damn it, something stabbed me. Damn it, it's burning." It is in Arto Malinen's back, in up to the handle. The knife Virpi Butt had discovered earlier in the kitchen. With difficulty he pulls it out, staggers, and falls forward. The shocked Mika tries to flee, but Virpi holds him back. Under death threats, she forces him to promise that he will not go to the police, then lets the young man go. When Emma comes out of the bathroom, she sees the bleeding Malinen on the floor. He pleads for help and an ambulance. Emma also gets scared and wants to leave the flat, but Butt threatens her too. Emma remains at the scene and has to watch as her friend lunges at the victim. She hits the 26-year-old several times and stabs him a total of 12 times. His body is covered in bruises and punctures. Then Virpi Butt drags the man, who had run into her by pure chance less than 2 days ago, into the bathroom and cuts his throat over the sink. Just like a year ago, Virpi Butt is now standing in front of the body of a dead man, only this time she is in a different flat. Simply leaving the body there is not an option for her. The dead body must disappear. She calls Jana Hivonen. He is still in her flat, looking after the children. Emma is now supposed to do the babysitting, while Hivonen helps dispose of the body. Emma sets off for the two children, not without being forcefully informed by Virpi Butt about what will happen to her if she goes to the police first. Hivonen, on the other hand, sets off for Malinen's flat with knives and a saw in his luggage. "What a midsummer," Hivonen is still moaning. Again, the two friends, as if in a frenzy, dismember the corpse. First, they cut off the head, but this time they don't keep it as a trophy. They then remove the fingertips and tattoos. They flush the organs down the toilet. They interrupt the cruel and sweaty procedure again and again. They smoke, drink, and recover from the physical exertion. After the body has bled out, they pack it in rubbish bags. They also steal the money and the knife used to murder Malinen from the flat. Then they contact a friend who helps to dispose of the body with a vehicle. Once again, the body parts are distributed among various rubbish bins in the city. For the head, however, they have a special disposal method. They place it in front of the car's tires so that they can crush it. The attempt fails, however, because the head keeps rolling away. In the meantime, Emma is very much at peace with the crime to which she had involuntarily become a witness. Virpi Butt's threat, however, weighs just as heavily on her soul. So instead of calling the police, she calls in a few friends, but they don't believe a word she says. On the very same day, the emergency call center receives 2 anonymous calls. The first caller tells of a murder of a man and the dismemberment of the body. The center thinks this call is a bad joke. After all, it is midsummer, and there is a lot of alcohol being drunk all over the country. Emergency calls are also received in masses. Not all of them are to be taken seriously, and the emergency call center is forced to try to distinguish between sincere calls for help and joking reports. A short time later, another anonymous call comes in. This time it is a female person. She reports having witnessed a murder and that the body has been dismembered. She gives details about the victim and also about the perpetrators. Although the report is still thought to be a hoax, this time they decide to investigate the tip-off. When the police arrive at Virpi Butt's and Jana Hivonen's house, it does not take long for the two to make a confession. They willingly lead the investigators to the rubbish bins with the body parts. The duo is arrested on the spot. In the following interrogations, the two also confess to the murder of Kari-Pekka Antonen. In 2003, countless rubbish bins in the Tampere area are searched in a large-scale search operation. Antonen's body, however, could not be found, and remains are missing to this day. On 9 September 2003, 4 people were finally brought to court. Besides Virpi Butt and Jana Hivonen, Mika and the driver of the car are also accused. The driver for helping to dispose of the body, and Mika for not reporting the murder. Emma, on the other hand, is not charged. Her anonymous phone call led to the solving of the case. The duo was charged with murder and disturbing the peace of the dead. They initially appear indifferent in court. In the further course of the proceedings, they show neither consciousness of guilt nor remorse. Instead, they are conspicuous for their laughter and sarcasm. While Butt wants to blame massive alcohol consumption for the crime, Hivonen boasts about the feeling of power that the murder of Antonen, the cannibalism, and dismemberment gave him. It is a great feeling, he says, to simply be above things and capable of anything. The two do not consider the act particularly cruel. They would not have inflicted prolonged suffering on the victims. The killing would have been quick. Even though the assumptions and presumptions are manifold, an assured motive for both acts remains unknown to this day. An expert opinion classifies both delinquents as fully culpable. On 9 June 2004, the verdict was decided. The driver of the car is sentenced to 3 months in prison. Mika receives a sentence of 30 days in prison. Virpi Butt and Jana Hivonen receive life sentences. Virpi Butt, against all recommendations, gets released on 31 December 2018 after 15 years and 5 months in prison. She now lives in Tampere again under a new name. A short time later, Jana Hivonen was also released. He, too, is at high risk of reoffending. Nevertheless, both offenders, favored by good conduct and stable family relationships, are given the chance of reintegration into Finnish society. The end. Closing words from the author. Dear reader, thank you for holding my book in your hands. This is my 6th book since June 2019, and I invite you to read all the other books in the series as well. Each is a true crime bestseller. May I write a few more lines about me? I write part-time, spending every free minute at my desk researching, writing, and editing texts. It took me years to find the courage to publish my first book because I got in my own way, as is quite typical. I needed everything to be perfect before I would take the plunge. So many years passed before I finally decided to close the door on perfection and instead told myself only a moving boat can be steered. I wanted to write, publish, and if possible, make a living from it. I acknowledge there may be some flaws in my work. Having a family makes it a more difficult decision, but one well worth it. Maybe one day we'll be able to live off the books entirely. After all, the first book's royalty distribution paid the bill for a family vacation, so that's a good start. Thank you for all the encouragement that reaches me through your reviews and encourages me to keep writing. To this day, I read, deeply grateful, every single review. If you enjoyed my book, it would delight me to receive a 5-star review from you after finishing it. There's no better way to support me and ensure that many more books in this series are published in the future. You have been listening to Finland True Crime, harrowing short stories about murder, robbery, kidnapping, abuse, and theft. Written by Adrian Langenscheid. Translated from the original in German by Leah Prescher. Narrated by Dallin Decker. This audiobook production is copyright 2023, Adrian Langenscheid. All rights reserved worldwide.